Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere is one of the most ambitious and exciting things that's currently unfolding in fantasy. If you're unaware, the Cosmere is Sanderson's fictional universe. Here, many of his series, standalones, and novellas take place. They all share a single creation myth, a single cosmology, but they take place on different planets. And since all these worlds in the Cosmere are connected, that means you should pay attention. There's always another secret. Being a big fan of the Cosmere and having caught up with all the current books has been incredibly rewarding. I mean, sometimes you're going to see a character from one series appear in another series, or other times you might just pick up on some small Easter eggs here and there. The connections overall are pretty light. I mean, Sanderson has written the Cosmere so that each book or series can be enjoyed without the context of the other. Though in some recent books there has been some pretty big reveals. But I do believe you're going to enjoy these books much more if you know the optimal way to read them so that you can pick up on all the small details. Now there is a deep lore to the Cosmere as well, which I won't be spoiling in this video. I'll let you discover that on your own. But in the future I will be making a Cosmere deep dive video where I go over the creation myth and everything else going on in the background. This video is spoiler free and it's made to help you start your journey into this incredible universe. The question arises, where do you start? It's not exactly that simple of an answer. The thing is, I don't want to give you a reading order. I want to give you the definitive, ultimate Cosmere reading experience. This is going to be the reading order that connects the Cosmere in the best way and makes the most sense for the timeline. If you're new to the Cosmere or you're rereading, this is the perfect order that saves the big reveals for their proper place. But first, real quick, this video is sponsored by NordVPN. We all know how important online privacy and security is, especially when you're surfing the wild waves of the internet. But fear not, because NordVPN is here to protect you like a digital fortress. What is a VPN? To put it simply, it is a virtual private network. With NordVPN, you can say hasta la vista to those cyber criminals, hackers, and pesky data sniffers. They won't stand a chance against NordVPN's military-grade encryption, so you can protect all your personal information. Now guys, I'm actually a huge fan of NordVPN. I pretty much use it every single day, and it's super simple to use. You can connect with one click, or you can enable auto connection, and they have over 5,400 servers in 60 different countries. Also, it's the fastest VPN on the planet, so you can expect some amazing speeds. But my favorite part is that NordVPN doesn't just protect you, it also allows you to hop around the globe and bypass those annoying content restrictions. Meaning you can watch that exclusive show you've been dying to see no matter where you are. Now the Nord Security Suite also includes NordPass, so you can manage your passwords, and Nord Locker. And NordVPN is compatible on all devices. It's like wrapping a security blanket around your entire digital life. You can protect your information today by using the link in the description for an exclusive deal, and it's completely risk-free. They have a 30-day money-back guarantee, so make sure to click the link. And a big thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring the video. For some readers, it can be a little intimidating getting into this interlinked group of fantasy novels. As of right now, there's 24 entries in the Cosmere, if you include novellas and short stories as their own thing, and count White Sand as one entry. But I'll be guiding you on where to start. In my opinion, the best starting point for the Cosmere, and where I started, is with the original Mistborn trilogy. Book 1 being Mistborn: The Final Empire, though on a lot of editions, it's just called Mistborn. Honestly, this series helped revive my love for fantasy and got me hooked on Sanderson's writing. It also happens to pave the way for many different storylines and Easter eggs in the other books. And the Mistborn trilogy has it all: a ragtag crew with great banter, a heist, a powerful tyrant, an incredible well-defined magic system, one of my favorites in fantasy period, and some really stunning cinematic action sequences, not to mention some really great philosophical moments. In Mistborn, you follow Vin as she grows from a young street urchin to a powerful allomancer, who's part of a rebellion against the Empire trying to take down the Lord Ruler. Now, I would say this is a really great, more mature version of a dystopian teen rebellion story like Divergent or The Hunger Games, with a lot more insight into the characters' conflicting motives and some more political commentary. The magic system of Mistborn and the ash-covered world of Scadrial is so unique. It's a lot of fun, it's easy to get into, and I think it's the best place to start. Now, however, on the odd occasion, I have seen some people just not vibe at all with Mistborn, but they end up liking other books by Sanderson. So in that case, I guess I would recommend starting with a standalone like Warbreaker or Elantris. Okay, after reading the first book, don't go on and read The Well of Ascension. You're actually gonna wanna pause and read a short story called The 11th Metal. This is a prequel short story that you can find in Arcanum Unbounded, which, by the way, you're gonna wanna pick this up. This is a collection of Cosmere short stories and novellas. The 11th Metal gives some background information on Kelsier, one of the main protagonists in Mistborn. And it's best read directly after finishing the first book, as it has some spoilers from that book. Now obviously, you move on to Mistborn Book 2, The Well of Ascension. Then you can move on to Book 3, The Hero of Ages. Now this epic conclusion sets the stage for some other things going on in the Cosmere, which again is why I think you should start with the Mistborn trilogy. Now after this, you could go and read Mistborn Era 2, or you could even start the Stormlight Archive, which is what I did, but I'm actually going to recommend that you go and read Elantris. Elantris was Brandon Sanderson's debut novel and his first standalone. It covers the story of three main characters within and around the city of Elantris, a ruined city that was once ruled by powerful beings with silver skin. After calamity strikes, the city is turned to ruins and the inhabitants from godlike beings to sickly monstrosities, and one of our protagonists has been struck with this curse. Princess Serene, another protagonist, is also really great. She's sort of the Sansa to Vin's Arya. Now, some fans argue that because this was Sanderson's first book, it should be where you start in the Cosmere. I don't really think that's necessary. I think it's better to start with Mistborn. The writing in Elantris is a little bit rougher. I think Sanderson improves later on. I still love it. I think it's worth your time, but it's just not the best introduction. Okay, you've now finished Elantris. The next thing to do is to read The Hope of Elantris. This is a short story that basically retells the climax of Elantris, but from a different point of view. It kind of acts as like a brief epilogue to Elantris. And again, you can find this in Arcanum Unbounded, and I would highly recommend reading it directly after completing Elantris. Then, The Emperor's Soul is what you should read next. This is a novella taking place on the same planet or shard world as Elantris. However, this is a standalone, and it's completely different from Elantris, to the point that actually it does work very well on its own, but there's a few references in there that you'll understand better if you've read Elantris. Now, this is actually one of my favorite novellas of all time. I really love The Emperor's Soul, and it also introduces some important aspects of the Cosmere, which you'll learn more about in future stories. Sometimes I've even recommended people starting with The Emperor's Soul if they just want to get a taste of Sanderson's writing, but again, I think this is the proper way to read it after reading Elantris and The Hope of Elantris. Okay, next up, you have the option to read White Sand if you choose. White Sand is a graphic novel that's split into 3 different volumes, and chronologically, it is the earliest Cosmere story. It's the earliest on the timeline. However, White Sand doesn't actually have a lot of Cosmere references within it, but there are some characters that are going to appear in future books, but in none of the previous ones, which is why I'm recommending that you read it here. Now, I did enjoy White Sand. I wouldn't say it's the best graphic novel. Actually, it's probably my least favorite Cosmere story out there, but it's still enjoyable, and there's also a graphic audio version. I haven't listened to the graphic audio, but let me know in the comments which version you think is better. You're now ready to read The Way of Kings, the first book in the Stormlight Archive. Now, this series has Sanderson's longest, chunkiest books you've ever seen. And the Stormlight Archive is planned to be a 10-book series that's going to be split into 2 5-book arcs, meaning that book 5 will have some form of conclusion, and then things will be picked up with a bit of a time jump in book 6. In my opinion, Stormlight is his best work yet. It's his magnum opus. It's no secret that it's definitely a bigger commitment than any of the other Cosmere stories, but if you like long, epic fantasy series like A Song of Ice and Fire and The Wheel of Time, which was actually finished by Brandon Sanderson after Robert Jordan passed, then you'll love the Stormlight Archive. The Way of Kings introduces Kaladin, a former soldier, now slave, who has a heavy weight on his shoulders, Shallan, a determined scholar with a mysterious past, and Dalinar, a high-ranking noble seeking redemption from his past while he struggles with visions and the burden of leadership. As the series progresses, the storylines of these characters intertwine and their individual quests converge, leading to grand-scale conflicts and revelations. Now, the Stormlight Archive is renowned for its intricate world building. I mean, the setting is incredibly unique, but also it has compelling characters and thought-provoking themes. And I would say it's in the Stormlight Archive where most of the Cosmere connections converge. Now, you may want to move on to Words of Radiance, but no, I don't recommend that. This is the best time to read Warbreaker. I mean, really, you could have read Warbreaker before starting the Stormlight Archive, but it's just important that you read it before reading Words of Radiance, because there is a lot of references and Cosmere stuff going on in the Stormlight Archive going forward that is from Warbreaker. So if you haven't read it yet, now is the time. This is a standalone novel as of right now. Sanderson has mentioned that he would like to write a sequel in the future, but this can completely be enjoyed on its own. Now, Brandon Sanderson has said that he wrote Warbreaker thinking of what would have happened when the city of Elantris was in its heyday. Now, the magic in Warbreaker is one of my favorites. It's based on a system called biochromatic breath, which is essentially a human's life force, which can be manipulated for various things. They can also breathe into inanimate objects and give them life. The system is complex, but it's explained really well and it's easy to comprehend. There's also these immortal god-type people called the Returned, who have special abilities, and people who can use breath to become immortal. Again, just make sure that you read this before starting Words of Radiance, because there are some really interesting connections that I never picked up on, because I didn't read this until after reading Words of Radiance. So a lot of those really cool references completely went over my head. So if you read it now, you'll get all the references. Now, this next one can actually be read at any point. It's a short story found in Arcanum Unbounded, Shadows of Silence in the Forest of Hell. Now, this is the Cosmere story that probably has the least amount of references in it. The reason I'm recommending that you read it now is because chronologically it takes place after The Way of Kings, but before Words of Radiance. But again, it's not really connected in any way, so it doesn't matter when you read it, but it is a really interesting short story. I think it's often overlooked, so I recommend that you do read it. Next up is Words of Radiance, the sequel to The Way of Kings, and one of my favorite Sanderson books ever. This time, much of the spotlight is given to Shallan and her backstory, and in this book, there's some big Cosmere Easter eggs that are revealed, and since you've been following my guide, you are completely prepared to pick up on these and have your mind be blown. You may be tempted to move right into Oathbringer, but this is the perfect time to read Edgedancer. This is a novella found in Arcanum Unbounded, and it takes place on Roshar, the same shard world as Stormlight. It follows a very eccentric and comedic character, and it takes place in the middle of Words of Radiance and the start of Oathbringer, which is why this is the best time to read this novella. And then finally, you can read Oathbringer, Book 3 in the Stormlight Archive, which gives us a deeper look at Dalinar. I think it's best to keep the momentum going and read this directly after reading Edgedancer. Now, Oathbringer, like most of the Stormlight books, does have some odd pacing here and there, but it has an incredible Sanderlanche of a conclusion. Now, after that epic, heavy-hitting conclusion, I recommend you take a break and read Sixth of Dusk. Sixth of the Dusk takes place chronologically near the end of the stories set in the Cosmere. Now, the setting is inspired by Brandon's fascination with Polynesian culture, and the story follows a trapper named Sixth of the Dusk as he strives to save his island home from a catastrophic danger that he's been warned about but doesn't understand. Now, before diving into Stormlight Book 4, you want to read Dawnshard. This is a novella that takes place right before Rhythm of War. The events of the novella evolve around Rysson, a character first introduced in Words of Radiance. I actually enjoyed this novella much more than Edgedancer. Now, once you're done with that, you can finally move on and read Rhythm of War. Now, this one is probably my least favorite Stormlight book, but it still has some really incredible moments. Not to mention, this is the book that has a ton of Cosmere Easter eggs. There is a lot of stuff going on and some pretty big reveals if you pay close attention. And now I would recommend starting with the second era of Mistborn, starting with the Alloy of Law. That's right, there's actually 7 books in the Mistborn series as of yet, with the first 3 making up Era 1, and then the other 4 comprising Era 2, which is also known as the Wax and Wane series. Now this is set on the same planet, but during a different time era, so it's really interesting getting to see how the world has changed over time and seeing all the little details and references to Era 1. It makes it feel much more epic in scope, and I actually really enjoy Mistborn Era 2. Some people don't like it as much as the original trilogy, but honestly, I think I'd like it about the same. The second Mistborn trilogy is basically a Western fantasy mixed with some Victorian mystery and some buddy cop vibes. In the Cosmere timeline, the second era of Mistborn is the second latest behind the Sixth of Dusk. Now, most of the references you're gonna get in the Alloy of Law are from the original Mistborn trilogy. Then we have the second book in the Wax and Wane series, Shadows of Self. I'd recommend reading this immediately after the Alloy of Law. Once again, most references here are from the original Mistborn trilogy. But after this, before you read the third book, I would recommend reading Alamancer Jack and the Pits of Altania, which is a short companion story to Shadows of Self, and the main character Jack appears in multiple interludes in Shadows of Self. So you should probably read this when it's fresh in your mind, and again, you can find it in Arcanum Unbounded. Then you can read book 3, The Bands of Mourning. Now this book has a lot of Cosmere references, but you're going to understand them all and understand the implications and the significance of all of these because you've read all the previous books. So you're doing good, but don't go reading The Lost Metal just yet. This is the time to read Mistborn Secret History. Secret History answers many of the questions we've had about the Cosmere, as well as questions about Mistborn Era 1 and 2. I read this novella after finishing Mistborn Era 1, which was a mistake. I still enjoyed it, but it does spoil something from the Wax and Wane series, so you should wait until after the Bands of Mourning before reading this one. Events in this novella have a significant impact on most, if not all, the future Cosmere novels. Again, Secret History can be found in Arcanum Unbounded. Then we have The Lost Metal. This is the 4th and final book in Wax and Wane. This ends Mistborn Era 2. And again, there is a lot of references here and some really big Cosmere significance, but if you read in this order, then you're going to be knowledgeable enough to understand all these references. And then finally, at the end of this list is actually when I would recommend reading Tress of the Emerald Sea. Yes, you can read it earlier, that's completely fine, but I personally would recommend at least having read Elantris, Warbreaker, and Mistborn before reading Tress, because there is just a ton of references, and if you want to be fully Cosmere immersed, then you're gonna want to pick up on all of those. That's why I think you should just wait to read Tress of the Emerald Sea after reading everything else. There's so many Easter eggs in Tress. They're not exactly the biggest reveals or anything, but there's just a lot of them, so I think you're going to enjoy it a lot more if you understand. If you can pick up on all the Cosmere tidbits. Tress is a very fun and whimsical adventure. It's basically the Cosmere's version of The Princess Bride. However, it's very different than any other Cosmere story, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend starting with Tress of the Emerald Sea, unless you do plan on rereading it later on after finishing the other Cosmere books. So that is my ultimate Cosmere reading order. I think this is the best way to read it so that you can get those big reveals at the times when you understand all the Cosmere references. Let me know in the comments if you would switch anything around, if you have a different Cosmere reading order, but also let me know what the first Cosmere book is that you read, because I'm very curious. Now, I do want to be making more Cosmere related videos and like lore deep dives and stuff. I especially want to be making some Mistborn and Stormlight Archive content very soon. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to support the channel, the best way to do that is either to leave a super chat down below or to check out my Patreon. That helps out the channel so much. I appreciate all of you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.